cikalong village sat quietly at the foot of a misty mountain, a few kilometers from the nearest town. The road to the village was narrow and winding, surrounded by tall bamboo trees that always swayed, even when the air felt still. Rara, an anthropology student from Jakarta, arrived with two friends Naya and Waidi to finish their final project about traditional spirit calling rituals. They stayed at the home of Mr. Warso, the village head who had lived alone since his wife passed away. Mr. Warso welcomed them kindly, but his sunken eyes showed hesitation. During their first dinner, Mr. Warso only nodded slowly when Rara asked about the spirit calling doll. There used to be people here who used the doll to call family spirits, but that was long ago. He said quietly, "The ones who come aren't always family." Rara quickly scribbled in her notebook, "Is the doll still here?" Mr. Warso said nothing. Then he stood up. He walked to an old cupboard behind the living room with a small key from his shirt pocket. He opened a wooden chest stored inside the cabinet. The smell of damp earth immediately filled the air. "Is this what you're looking for?" he asked. Inside the chest lay a small wooden doll, roughly carved, tied with black thread, and wrapped in a tattered red cloth. Its face wasn't painted, but seemed to be naturally formed by the grain of the wood. There was a small hollow in the doll's belly, like a slot for placing something. Waidi quickly took out his phone to record. "Don't film it," Mr. Warso said sharply. "It doesn't like being photographed." Rara stepped closer, even though the room was warm. Her body suddenly shivered, as if the air around her dropped in temperature. She couldn't explain it, but her eyes felt stuck on the doll's face. "Is it true this doll can call spirits?" Naya asked, half joking. Mr. Warso didn't answer, but then he quietly said, "If you're sure who you want to call, and you're ready if it's not them who comes, then go ahead and try." That night, they slept in the guest rooms, but around a.m., Waidi woke up to a sound. 3 slow knocks on the wall beside his bed. The sound was steady, soft, and then stopped when Waidi opened the window. No one was there, but the sharp smell of raw meat suddenly filled his room. He shut the window immediately. In the next room, Rara had a dream. In it, an old woman stood outside Mr. Warso's house. Her body trembled, but her eyes looked directly at Rara. Then the woman said, "I'm not the one you called." That sentence jolted Rara awake. Cold sweat clung to her skin. Her breathing was uneven. The room was dark, but something felt different, heavy, pressing down. She glanced at her phone. 2:09 a.m. From the direction of the living room came the sound of wood scraping, like a chair being dragged across the floor. She held her breath. The sound came once, then silence. In the next room, Waidi was already awake. He stood by the window, staring out. That awful rotting meat smell from earlier still lingered. He hadn't told the others, but now his eyes looked exhausted red, like someone who hadn't slept in days. Morning came, but the chill in the rooms didn't lift with the sun. During breakfast, Mr. Warso watched them closely. "Did any of you dream last night?" Naya laughed. "Yeah, I dreamed this house got flooded. Maybe I drank too much water." Waidi just nodded. Rara wanted to mention her dream, but stayed quiet. She felt strange bringing it up, but deep down, she knew it wasn't an ordinary dream. That afternoon, they walked to the village hall, interviewing 2 elderly locals about the spirit calling ritual. One of them mentioned an old phrase, "Wayang Siksa," a spirit doll. They said not just a medium, but a house for whatever was summoned. If you call them and forget to close the door, the elder said, anything can enter. Once again, Rara felt that strange chill crawl up the back of her neck. That night, they agreed not to touch the doll, just to observe and document. Rara sat alone in the living room. She set the camera to record, pointing it at the cupboard where the wooden chest was stored. Mr. Warso had gone to bed. Naya was scrolling through her phone. Waidi reviewed his notes. The house was unusually quiet. Then the camera's microphone picked up a sound, Click, click, click. It was soft, like knocking, coming from inside the chest. Rara stood up instantly. All three of them turned toward the cupboard. "Did you hear that?" Naya whispered. The chest was vibrating, just slightly. No one dared open it. A few minutes later, the sound stopped. They stared at one another. No one said a word. No one touched the camera, and none of them mentioned the fact that Rara cried silently later that night, not out of fear, but because she felt like she recognized the voice inside that chest. Rara couldn't explain it. The voice had been faint, barely a whisper, but it stirred something in her, like an old memory being replayed from a distance, a voice that didn't belong in this place, yet felt deeply personal. She barely spoke during breakfast. Her food remained untouched. Naya teased her. Whitey asked if she had a fever, but Rara only smiled weakly. Outwardly, she looked fine, but inside, her mind kept echoing that voice, not the words, just the tone, the feeling behind them. Later that day, Rara stayed in her room. She connected the camera to her laptop and rewatched the footage from the night before. At 3:41, the audio picked up a faint sound, a whisper. She turned up the volume, and her heart stopped. It was her grandmother's voice, or at least, it sounded like her. "Ra, you still like sitting on the porch in the evenings, don't you?" The exact sentence her grandmother used to say gently, with warmth, a phrase only the two of them knew. But it came from inside the wooden chest. Rara's hands trembled. Her breath hitched. Part of her wanted to believe it was real, that her grandmother had come through, but another part knew better. That night, the third night, they all gathered again in the living room, without Mr. Warsaw. Whitey had been reading folklore journals about mimic spirits, entities that imitate loved ones, using memories and voices to trick the living into making contact. They don't need to possess you. Whitey said, they just need your belief. Once you believe it's really your grandmother, you'll talk back, and that's how they get in. Rara said nothing, but when everyone went to bed, she stayed in front of the cupboard, alone. She sat cross-legged, staring at the closed chest. The doll hadn't moved. Nothing had shifted. In a trembling voice, she whispered, "If you really are Grandma, say my nickname, the one only you used, silence." Then something answered, a faint voice from inside the chest, "Duck Melati." Rara's heart nearly stopped. That was it, her nickname from childhood, a name she had never told Naya or Whitey, a name only one person in the world had used. Tears filled her eyes, but then she remembered something. Her grandmother had always spoken in a light, fragile tone. This voice was low, coarse, hollow. She turned her head toward the old mirror in the corner of the room. Her reflection was still sitting there, but it was smiling, and not just a normal smile. It was too wide, too symmetrical, and it never blinked. Rara froze. Her reflection in the mirror was still sitting, just like her, but the smile, that unnatural, inhuman curve stretched wider than any real mouth could. Her real face trembled, but the reflection stayed calm, unblinking, still smiling. Then, without warning, the head in the mirror tilted slowly to the side, first right, then left, as if studying her. From behind, the door creaked open by itself. Cold air swept into the room, carrying a smell not just of damp earth, but of something deeper, metallic, rotten. Rara turned around. The hallway was empty. When she looked back, the reflection in the mirror was gone. In the room next door, Naya heard something, a laugh, soft at first, then warping into a quiet sob. She thought it was Whitey messing around, but when she stepped into the hallway, the lights flickered. The corridor was dark. The air was heavy, and Whitey was still in his room, headphones on, unaware of anything. Back in the living room, Rara sat silently, her hands clenched around the thread she had pulled from the doll earlier. Her face was pale, and her breath was shallow. From the cupboard came a faint scratching, Whitey rushed in. He had read more stories about spirits not just mimicking, but slowly replacing. The idea chilled him. They don't always need to possess someone, he said. Sometimes they just need a place, a home, a vessel, a name, and belief. Rara didn't respond, but then she looked at Whitey and her lips slowly curled into a familiar, wide grin. Mr. Warso appeared out of nowhere. His shirt was untucked, his eyes red, in his hands a cloth bundle and a small bottle. I should have never let you see that doll, he said, staring straight at Rara. It's not her. Girl, that's not your grandmother. It's the one who's been waiting. What is it? Whitey asked, trembling. Mr. Warso looked toward the hallway. It wants this house and whoever believes in it. Rara stepped out of her room, but her movements weren't hers. She glided, eyes black, thread dragging behind her on the floor. Where she stepped, the floor darkened like it was burning silently. On the walls, faint symbols began to form, as if scratched from inside the wood. Strange curves, twisting letters in no language they understood. The air buzzed with something unnatural. Mr. Warso stood between Rara and the living room. He didn't shout. He didn't pray aloud. He simply looked into her eyes and whispered, "Forgive me, girl. I should have closed the door a long time ago." But Rara, or whatever wore her face now, simply stared back and spoke in a voice deeper than her own. "If humans won't stay in this place, then we will." Suddenly, from the front yard, came the sound of the front gate swinging open by itself. Wind blasted through the house. Fog poured inside like a living thing. Naya and Whitey ran toward the door, dragging each other out into the night. They turned back just once. The house behind them was no longer there, only thick mist, and in the middle of it, a silhouette, smiling with Rara's voice echoing softly, "I'm not alone anymore." The voice echoed across the mist as Naya and Whitey stood frozen at the edge of the yard. The house had vanished, or rather, something else now stood in its place, a faint silhouette in the fog. Not a structure of wood and stone, but a presence, shifting, watching. Naya tried calling Rara's name. Her voice cracked. No reply, only a low, throaty hum vibrating through the air. Like 1,000 whispers layered on top of each other, Whitey took a step forward, but was stopped mid-stride. Something invisible yet solid blocked his path. Like a wall of glass, cold, immovable, he turned to Mr. Warso, who stood behind them in silence. "She's still in there," Whitey said. "We have to get her out." Mr. Warso shook his head slowly. "That's not her anymore, not fully." Back inside what used to be the house, Rara sat quietly in the center of a room that no longer felt like a room. The windows had vanished, the walls twisted in unnatural angles, and around her, the floor creaked as if something beneath it was breathing. She held the black thread in one hand, the doll's red cloth in the other. A voice spoke, not aloud, but straight into her thoughts. "You opened the door. Little one," you called, and I answered. She didn't cry. She didn't fight. She simply whispered, "I just didn't want to be alone anymore." Outside, Naya suddenly screamed. The doll's face had appeared on the surface of her phone screen. Even though the phone was turned off, it stared back at her, its carved eyes following her movements. Mr. Warso raised a cloth-covered object, an old charm wrapped in twine, and began to murmur under his breath. He didn't recite verses. He didn't shout. He simply closed his eyes, stood still, and refused to engage. "I'm not fighting it," he said. "I'm ignoring it. That's the only way it leaves, inside the mist." The air grew thicker. Rara stood now, but her expression was blank, not possessed, but trapped. Her thoughts were still hers, but they echoed through the walls of something ancient that now wore her shape. She spoke aloud, to no one and everyone at once. "You don't need to fight me. You just need to believe I belong here." And the mist answered with silence. Outside, the fog began to fade. The shape in the mist retreated. The blocking force dissolved. The cold lessened, but the house was still gone. In its place, a patch of dirt, untouched, as if nothing had ever been built there. No signs of life, no sound of wind, just stillness. Mr. Warso turned to Whitey and Naya. If she doesn't choose to leave it behind, we can't pull her out. This isn't a battle to win, it's a door she has to close from the inside. And in the void between, Rara sat once more, hands open, doll gone, chest empty. She looked up at the darkness around her and whispered, "I don't need you anymore. I don't need to know. I'm done asking." The words drifted into the darkness like a thread being cut, and everything changed. The air that had been dense with presence, with pressure, with the unnatural weight of something not human began to lighten. The mist no longer clung to her skin. The walls around her stopped breathing. The faint symbols that had etched themselves into the floor began to fade, like chalk in the rain. The presence didn't scream. It didn't fight. It simply withdrew, because Rara had made a choice, not through ritual, not through confrontation, but by doing the one thing the entity could not endure, letting go. She opened her eyes. She was back in the house, the real house. The windows were intact. The smell of rot was gone. The air was warm and still. The chest was closed, the doll gone. She stood and walked slowly to the front door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. Outside, the fog had lifted. The morning sun spilled across the yard, and there they were, Naya, Whitey, and Mr. Warso. When she stepped outside, Naya ran to her and embraced her without a word. Whitey just stared, mouth slightly open, unsure if she was really back. Rara smiled faintly. "I don't want answers anymore," she said softly. "I just want to be present with what's real." Days passed. They left the village. They never tried to find the doll again, never tried to record more footage. They submitted a stripped-down version of their project. No mention of the ritual, no mention of the voice in the chest, and none of them ever returned to Cikalong. But sometimes, when Rara walked past old thrift stores or saw carved wooden toys at markets, she would pause for a moment. Her breath would catch just for a second. Then she'd walk away, because the door was closed and she wasn't going to open it again.